Welcome to the Rent Estate Podcast, a conversation on how you can achieve retirement security, financial freedom, and the new American dream through rental property investments. And here's your host, Kevin Ortner, CEO of Renters Warehouse.
All right, this is the first episode of the Rent Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ortner, CEO of Renters Warehouse. Thanks for being here. We've got a great guest today, but I'm so excited for this first episode and the journey that I hope everyone will join me on as we talk about real estate investing. And on the Rent Estate Podcast, we're going to be talking about financial freedom, financial independence, and retirement security using single-family real estate investments, and doing interviews with successful real estate investors of all sizes, true property management professionals and investment experts to mine for some of that gold and really get those best practices, tips, and tricks for anyone out there who's investing in real estate and those who are looking to start. So for those who don't already know me or Renters Warehouse, I've been investing in real estate for 18 years, which is literally half of my life, and helping others do the same for over a decade now. Renters Warehouse exists really to be a guide for those seeking financial independence, financial freedom, retirement security, and we believe that all investors deserve a partner who can help them execute on this investment strategy with ease and cut through the confusion and the complexity that can sometimes come with us. It's with this mindset that at Renters Warehouse, we created a process that's helped over 50,000 investors across the United States, and today we manage over 22,000 homes, making us the largest real estate investment company in America. So with that, I think this podcast is going to be a great vehicle to help me share success stories, tips, tricks, and ensure that those investing in single-family rentals can avoid the pitfalls and the lost time and headaches and achieve true financial freedom and passive income through real estate. So we're passionate about this stuff. I'm really excited for this new format, this new platform to talk about and share a lot of the success secrets. Today is our first episode, and I have what I think is the perfect guest. My brother, my business partner, my friend, John Ortner, joins us today to kick this thing off. And really, I thought he was a great guest to have. And John, I wanted to have you on one of the first episodes here. Is you were probably one of the handful of people that I thought were perfect to be on the first episode. As you were with us from the beginning, you really got me invested in real estate early on. You've been investing with me in real estate since I got started, and you introduced me to Renters Warehouse. So there's a few other people that I could think of that would be great for the first episode. You happen to be in the office, so I thought that was fantastic. So let's jump in. And John, I think this is going to be pretty amazing. It was literally 2 months ago, or 2 years ago this month, that I released my first book, Rent Estate Revolution. Yep. That's really taken off, and we're turning it into the podcast format, which is going to be exciting to be able to talk about different lessons learned in the book, different investment advice for people that's in the book. But it was really you who brought me into Renters Warehouse. And like I mentioned, someone I've been investing in real estate with for a long time, with our father. And so this, I think, is one of those full circle moments where we're really bringing it all together, and we've got this new, really cool, fun platform. And so I'm thrilled to have you on. Thanks for joining us. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I felt really honored until you said I was the only one in the office for the first episode. But nonetheless, you bought the first house, so you kind of really got us into it. But, we went to ASU. I left. You showed up.
You left right when I was getting there. Thanks.
Yeah, I know.
Appreciate
it. I figured we were in high school together. You didn't need to spend college with me whatsoever. But ended up joining the Coast Guard and, would come and visit you. And you ended up buying your duplex down there, which I thought was pretty awesome. And when I got out of the Coast Guard, moved back to Minnesota, got into mortgages so we could figure out how to buy more houses and figure out the banking system. And Dad was always, huge on us never renting and always owning, but renting to other people.
Yeah. So that's true. A lot of people ask me, have been an entrepreneur now for a long time, and you and I had some different businesses together that can go unmentioned since they were all major failures.
Good learning lessons.
Good learning lessons, and we took a lot away from it. But, they always said, is entrepreneurship in your family? Is your dad? I'm like, for a long time, I was like, well, no, my dad was a cop. Like police officer, had some side businesses and stuff. But the more I've reflected on that, I realized he really was, right? He had the construction company, built homes, built a mini storage. He's doing a big renovation there now. And it turns out what he was, and I'm sure if we asked him if he was an entrepreneur, he'd be like, no, right? And I was a police officer and I did some side gigs, right? But he gave that good advice to us and really encouraged us never to rent a house.
Well, I think what Dad always has told me is that he did the police job, or he was a cop, so that he had the money coming in. So like Mom always had groceries,
right?
But then he did all of his other stuff, so it allowed him to risk, and he knew that he'd always have something to fall back on if his construction company failed, or the mini storage failed, and as we know, because we've failed in a lot of businesses, but we've always had something to fall back on, I think. So
or figured it out along the way, right? Yeah. So how has rental real estate, impacted you throughout your life? We obviously talked a bit about, how you got started and what you did in the real estate world, but how has this business, this industry, or real estate itself impacted you over time?
I think it goes back to a couple years ago, actually maybe just last year, when we were actually, me and Dad were going through our rental company, and we didn't realize, one, how many units we actually had.
Yeah, that is true.
Because we have Renters Warehouse managing a lot of our stuff, which makes it a lot easier. And two, how much equity we've built up over 20 years.
18
years. Yeah. I think we've only refinanced really once, and we never do cash out. We just did a rate term refinance, which is always our plan.
Right.
Is just to try to get everything paid off. And that's when it kind of really hit me with like a hammer. I was like, oh my God, because I just always put it to the side of my mind.
Right.
We'd have things we'd have to deal with, maintenance or, some vacancy, and, it's stressful at the time. But after 18 years to realize how much equity and net worth we've been able to build, really with, there was effort, but it wasn't difficult.
Yeah.
Was pretty amazing.
It's the time game, right? You got to just do things early and often and let it play out over time. And I think was one of the investment strategies we talk about, right? Is we weren't investing to get rich quick. We weren't doing house flipping, and weren't even really investing for cash flow. We were investing for the equity piece, right? So we've never made money at all over the 18 years that we've had real estate. In fact, we've invested a lot into the real estate, but it's when you look at your personal balance sheet, it starts to show up and really actually make a difference. So I think that's funny. That's one, kind of leads into a good question. I think that's obviously one strategy for real estate investing is really, a lot of people go out and say, I want to buy real estate to have the cash flow. Some people aren't concerned about the cash flow at all. They're just looking to build equity over time. And as we referenced the book earlier on, in the book, Rent Estate Revolution, in chapter 2 starts out with a story about a gentleman named Gary, who I believe was your client, and had bought real estate for his kid to live in, and then really kind of started to pass that down. But so for those who haven't read the book yet, chapter 2 starts out with Gary, and I don't know, he was your client, so maybe you can talk a bit about Gary and his investment strategy and how real estate impacted him.
Sure. Well, Gary was a successful professional talent finder for people in Silicon Valley. His daughter ended up moving to Minnesota and ended up buying a townhome. And this is during the downturn. So it was
2007, 2008, something like that.
I think 2008 or 2009, because I started 2008. So 2009, and bought a townhome. And especially coming from San Francisco, he couldn't believe, how affordable
the price,
price of suburb Minneapolis was. And ended up just deciding to buy another townhome in the development to turn into a rental. And that was the first one that I ended up renting for him. And he ended up buying 7 over the course of 5 years, all of which he still owns and retains. In fact, the first tenant I just placed for him just moved out last summer.
Wow, 10 years later.
Yeah, 10 years later.
Cow, that's a good tenant. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're supposed to do here, right? Is find good
great
tenants. So that was fun. But he doesn't really own real estate anywhere else. Like, he does have an apartment in the bottom in his basement of his house in San Francisco. That's 400 square feet. He's rented to like an artist for the last 20 years.
Wow.
And it was nothing. It was more of just kind of helps him pay his utilities.
Yeah.
and that's it. And they're pretty quiet. But he
Well,
really
in San Francisco, that 400 square foot apartment probably goes for a lot these days, considering just this morning I saw the article about all the RVs covering the streets in San Francisco and the Google campus.
Yes.
And they're implementing laws now to outlaw RVs on the street side.
So unfortunately, the artist passed away, but his daughter now rents the place.
Oh, got it.
So
Got it.
moved in, and
She probably gets a deal on it then. For
yeah,
that, I imagine.
Gary's a good guy, so she gets a pretty good deal. I said I'll live here for that.
So that's interesting. So Gary still lives in San Francisco, in Silicon Valley?
He does. He comes back to Minnesota for the summers because he doesn't want to be in Minnesota for the winters to spend time with his grandchildren.
Got it. So he's investing out of state.
He's investing
not
out of
where
state.
he's from, right?
Correct.
Which I think people in some of those high real estate markets like San Francisco, Silicon Valley, New York,
We have a lot of
a
clients
lot of those,
that are-
right? They can't invest. It doesn't make sense to invest in where they live, right? Which is something we can come back to later on. So, so Gary bought 7 here in Minneapolis, and how come he kept buying them after that first 1 or 2?
Again, it just makes sense with the money. And at the time in 2009, 2010, you weren't making a lot of money in the stock market. The S&P wasn't returning anything. He's a big stock guy as well. And he's said, I can put, $150,000, $170,000 to work in Minnesota and get an 8%,
Right.
9% return. Where else can I even find that?
Right. Yeah, that's exciting stuff.
It still kind of was close to home though, because he's still, they're all in the same
They're all here.
community
Yeah.
that he lives in
Yeah.
half the time.
So that's Gary, and Gary's been a good client of ours for a long time, and I remember Gary, which is why we wrote about him in the book, because he was a great example. But you've been with Renters Warehouse longer than me, nearly since the beginning of this company, and started out as a leasing agent, helping people rent their homes and help them with their investment strategy. And really at that time was about how to not get just crushed by the real estate market when things were in a downturn. You've since evolved a lot in the business and now work with our institutional clients who own hundreds or thousands of homes across the country. But are there other clients that come to mind, that you think about, not necessarily on the institutional side, those that own hundreds or thousands, they're a little bit harder to relate with, but people who own 1, 2, 5 homes that, have really had a great success story investing in single family rentals?
Yeah, I've got a couple that come to mind. One is Zach. Zach, I actually is one of our friends from high school. Convinced him to get into the rental business, especially when I first started at Renters Warehouse.
You needed clients.
I needed clients.
Yeah.
So him and his dad bought a home in Eden Prairie in Minnesota, where he also was living. So close to home, but had us rent and manage it. And that was 2009. He still has it 10 years later. I think he's gone through 4 tenants. Has had
not a bad track record.
Great success story. But he's also ended up buying just only one more. He ended up having children and getting married, which I think limited his ability to keep acquiring homes. So, but he's got 2 that he's definitely seen the benefit from. Another person that didn't refinance. So his plan was kind of keep and hold and pay it off, which goes back. I think our original plan when we first talked about doing it was just, this was our retirement plan. Is buy stuff, put in money if we need to, but like we know when they're paid off, we can retire when we're 48 or 50 or
retirement plan, right? And you mentioned
that's how I sold Zach on it.
You mentioned Zach, had kids and a family, and so he couldn't buy more real estate. But I'd argue that we need to talk to him because he should be buying more, right? He should have one for each one of his kids' college fund, and all that kind of stuff. Because this is the surefire way to have some equity and some wealth when you get older.
Well, especially I think lending was restricted for a while,
right?
Especially after the crash when he first was buying stuff. But now it's opened up a lot more, and single-family rentals has really become a recognized asset class, both on Wall Street and just nationally. And so there's definitely a lot more programs that are available now than there used to be in 2009 to 2011.
Right. So Zach bought property in his backyard. He was living very close to his rentals. I think one of the homes he lived in, he turned into a rental, and he still lives nearby. Gary was somewhat in a similar community where he was living in the summer, but spends most of his time in California. So as you talk to new clients or people interested in getting into investing in single family rentals, what do you think is best? We get this question a lot, right? Like, should I buy close to home in my backyard, which the stats show 85% of people buy like within 20 miles of their home. I don't remember the exact stat, but it was pretty astounding. It's generally in the neighborhood close to where you live. You know, is that the right approach, or what do you recommend to people?
I think that is the old way of looking at things, because people would want to be around in case the toilet keeps running, or,
right,
you know, to do simple maintenance on their property. Also, there wasn't a renter's warehouse 15 years ago that was able to actually provide professional services. You know, it was a lot of mom and pop operations, and still is. So what I've found is even people that buy in their backyard end up using a management company because they're busy. I didn't realize how much softball, soccer. I don't have children, so I don't understand how people put Excel grids together of like figuring out what their kids are doing on a daily basis. So they don't have time to maybe run over like what we used to do when we didn't have families and would just go and paint on a Saturday or something.
Right.
So our professional services are being used a lot more. So what's the difference if you're using us and you buy a property in your backyard, or you buy something that maybe your money goes a little bit further and you can get better returns? Like the southeast of the US is a really great market to get high yielding rents. I think it's labor's cheaper, just houses are cheaper,
right,
for a number of factors, but rents have actually gone up a lot. So if you're going to have us manage a property in Minneapolis, what's the difference if we manage it in Alabama or Florida?
Yeah, I think that's what's really changed over the last 5 years, maybe, right? As technology's come into the space and the business has grown, it was very much people wanted to invest where they could touch it, feel it, see it, be there all the time. But now also there's so much opportunity to invest in real estate and other markets where the yield's so much higher. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we're seeing people get attracted to the Renters Warehouse Investor Marketplace, one of the new things we've added to the business this year, where you can buy and sell tenanted homes anywhere across the country. And, you know, it's funny. I think the answer is you can do either, right? It just depends on what your strategy is and what you're comfortable with. Our Chief Investment Officer, Greg Rand, always talks about, hey, if you live in Charlotte, do you own enough Charlotte? Like, you need more real estate in Charlotte, or you need more real estate in Florida. And if the real estate investment makes sense, then yeah, like you should buy more because it's good for the long term. But there's also people in markets where it doesn't make as much sense to buy a single family rental home. The yield's not there, very expensive to get into the game. And so we're seeing them end up in places like St. Louis, Kansas City, Alabama, Texas, you know, all these places that you mentioned where the yields are frankly incredible. Right. Mm-hmm. And personally, we talked about our real estate investments and our holdings. We're invested mainly in two markets, and that's where we've lived before, right? Yep. Minneapolis and Phoenix. And I look at some of the opportunities of their markets, and it's pretty amazing. And I imagine we'll be going there soon.
I think so. And something also to remember, because I'm a big fan of traveling, is that if you're in Minnesota or a winter climate and you buy a rental in Florida, you can actually write off your trip to Florida because you're going to, you know,
as long as you go by your property, right?
Yes. As long as you go by your property, and definitely talk with a CP. I'm definitely not a tax professional.
You are definitely not a tax professional. That is for certain. So in your opinion, then, what, again, you get these questions all the time. You've been doing this a long time, but what's the, for the audience, what's the best type of single family rental property to buy? Or what's the best investment out there? What rents quick? What has a good rent and return and a yield and all that kind of stuff?
I think it comes down to getting your feet wet. It's probably best to just buy a single family home. You're going to just be dealing with one family or one tenant or a group of, you know, tenants, and it kind of, you know, gets you into the game.
What kind of house?
To be honest, I would say a townhome.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to deal with it all depends on price and cost and location.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of factors that come in, which is
there
why
like
you definitely want to talk with someone. But I think townhomes are a good way to get your feet wet.
Is there a sweet spot for like bedrooms, bathrooms, size, garage, swimming pools, all that stuff?
I think a sweet spot is 3-bedroom, 2-bath, or a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath. 2 bedrooms, you're going to limit yourself at rent price growth. 3 bedrooms, you're always open to a single person that wants to have a guest room and an office, a couple, young family, It broadens your base of potential tenants, which gives you the opportunity to choose the best tenant and have options.
I say the same thing: 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 3-bath, like that situation. If you can get a 2-car garage attached, that's huge. Some markets you don't really have that option, but people like that. The ultimate question we get from real estate investors all the time is, should I have a swimming pool?
Depends. It depends on the market. So Arizona, yes, because you're going to get a premium on rent. And we've both lived in Arizona. And if I lived in Arizona tomorrow, I would want a pool because that's what you have to do. Minnesota, no, you have to drain it. You have to deal with the winter. There's definitely insurance causes that come in, but it all comes down to the market. Florida is like kind of hit or miss.
Yeah. So you'd say depends, right? It's the answer to that one.
I'd say if you're going to be buying a house in Phoenix, a single family home, you'd want a pool.
Okay. Yeah, I think if you do buy a house with a pool, make sure that I would include pool maintenance with the rent, because you don't want to rely on your residents to be taking care of the pool. It causes a lot of issues. And ensure that you have the proper insurance and fencing. So there's some more things you have to go through there. It can be worth it, especially some of our clients say, I'm going to buy a home today that I want to retire in 15 years and start paying it off and have someone paying it off for me and get it at a better value. And then obviously you might consider things differently as well, because you may live there one day. So I think there's a lot of factors there. But if you are going to buy property with a swimming pool, which is, don't know how we got on this topic, very off topic, it's important to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row.
You definitely want to talk with professionals. So I would speak with leasing agents and see, does it really matter or not for whatever market that you're looking in. I'd also talk with one of our real estate advisors if you're going to work with Renters Warehouse, because we buy and sell as well as lease. Because in some markets like Phoenix, it's going to help your housing appreciation costs as well, which ultimately, if you're holding it for a long term, is going to calculate into your yield.
Sure. All right. So one more question for you, and that's for the 20-somethings out there listening, maybe early 30s. Well, frankly, anybody, but certainly the 20-somethings out there listening. What is your real estate advice to the up-and-coming generations, the young millennials, Gen X, all those guys coming up? Gen Z, I guess. Excuse me.
I would say, one, read your book, which is, a shameless plug. But what you did, you were, and that's also why you're the CEO and I work for you, because you figured this out.
And you are older, just so we're all clear.
Yeah, I am older. I look younger if you're watching on YouTube or
yeah.
anywhere else, but that's because you're the CEO. And
fortunately, the headsets actually cover up my grays I got coming on the sideburns here, so it's good. We might have to start doing this in black and white.
Either way. Well, this might be my only time on the show now, so who knows. I would as when you're young, your credit is typically good. You're going to be able to get financing easy, especially with FHA and everything on. I would do what you did, which is buy a house when you're 18, you're going to be living with people anyways. So why rent an apartment with a whole bunch of roommates? Have them rent from you. And basically it comes down to the whole rent estate thing. Like, where is a better thing where you can borrow money from someone else and have other people pay it back, and you get all the upside, maybe even a little cash flow in the deal. So if you're going to live with 2 or 3 different guys or girls or a combination thereof, and you're going to rent an apartment, if you can come up with a down payment, especially, different parts of the country, it's not much, maybe $5,000, depending on the economics of things, if you have a great graduation party, you might be able to come up with half of that or something, and hit up family or whatever. Buy a house, have people rent from you, and that starts you on your way. And then, try to pick up a house every 2 or 3 years and keep going and have rent out. I'd go, if I was young, I would go from what you did in a way. Well, you did duplex, but I go single family, rent out bedrooms, do that for a year, however long I can, and muster up some money, work my ass off, and buy a duplex, live in one side, rent out the bedroom that I was living in the other house. So that's still getting taken care of and paid for. Then I actually have my own place and my own space, so you're not stepping over people after parties on weekends and stuff like that if you don't want to. But then you also have...
Well, no one wants to do that.
The other side. Yeah, well, this was college, so that's why I was talking about that. Then you have the other side that you can rent out, and most of the time that's going to be able to cover most of your mortgage, or at least a good chunk. And either way, you're still living very cheaply. but you're building equity there.
See, when I invited you on, I didn't tell you that there was going to be right and wrong answers to things, but I'll actually challenge you on that a little bit.
That's fine.
Because I think what a lot of people don't know and remember, and you know this because you're in the mortgage business, but remember, you can use an FHA loan on a property that has 4 units or less, right? Because it's still, as long as you're living in it.
That is true.
Because a 4-unit building is considered a single family property, right? And FHA is up to 4 units. So you could leverage your FHA loans to buy up to a 4-unit building, which is still technically single family homes and single family. So is a duplex and a triplex, but you go up to 4 units. Then you got your own place and you could rent 3 other units out, right? And oftentimes there's markets where you can find these for a reasonable price. You might be able to buy a 4-unit building for $350,000. Worst case, say $400,000 in certain markets. What, 3% down, $12,000?
Yeah.
So you get into a 4-unit building for $12,000, and likely those other 3 units are going to pay the entire mortgage for you, and you've got started out in
plus
that regard
cash
as well.
flow,
Plus some cash flow, maybe, right? So there's a lot of different ways to get started, whether it is the home or the duplex. Just remember, you can go all the way up to a 4-plex on an FHA loan, and that's a great way to get started in this business. But I think the big takeaway for me, at least for everyone, is if you're young, get started.
Oh,
right?
for sure. And it also just proves this is why you're the CEO, because I was thinking too small.
I
was thinking
too small.
duplex.
Right.
You were thinking 4-plex.
That's right.
And when do you want to live in a 4-plex? When you're younger anyways.
Right.
So
exactly.
That's why you're the boss.
Well, with that, I think it's a great place to probably end our first episode as you give me compliments. So thank you. Thanks for joining us, John. And if you've been listening or watching and you enjoyed this, please support the podcast by subscribing, like it, comment, share it with your friend, leave comments. We'd love to grow a following here and be able to share this great investing advice and real tactical things that are going to come over time. As one of my goals is to bring in a lot of the folks that work with Renters Warehouse and work with investment properties every day and pull out their tips and tricks to understand, what people, even if you're doing it yourself and you're going to manage your home yourself, how can we help you do that with some of our rental tips, rent collection tips, maintenance tips, whatever it might be. We're going to have a great series of great professionals coming on. And if you're looking for help with your real estate investments or frankly making a real estate investment plan like we were just talking about here, check us out at renterswarehouse.com. Give your local office a call, submit a question on the website, a web form. One of our local rent estate advisors will get back with you and start talking about how we can help you out, how we can build that plan. And thanks for checking out the podcast. We'll see you next time for episode 2.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Rent Estate Podcast with your host, Kevin Ortner. If you enjoyed today's show, head over to rentestate.com for a free rental property analysis and learn how you can list, invest, and rent all under one roof.